So we are in week 3 of the Creativity Embodied series. This week we are joined by Alexis. We're discussing creative work. So it's been quite a pleasure. And we've taken a trip down the lanes of community and around culture. So this week in looking at creative work, I especially wanted to focus in on embodying creative work, and wanted to start off with also defining creative work, what that means, and go from there. So Alexis, let's meet you. Welcome to the call. Tell us about yourself. Give us some plugs. Where can we find you? Who are you?
Yeah, my name's Alexis. I'm currently living in Windsor, Ontario. I grew up in the GTA, and I came here for university. I always thought that I would go back, but I fell in love with the city, and I always found work throughout my summers here. So I always ended up staying, and kept thinking like, oh, I'll go back. But I just thought Windsor was a really perfect balance between big city and small countryside, because you got like the Essex County, so we got really good wine country, and just Toronto wasn't it for me anymore. So I decided to stay. I have a degree in drama in education and community. A lot of people just hear the drama part and they're like, oh, so like we'll see you on Broadway or commercials. And I'm like, no, it's education and community. So essentially it's the best way I can describe it is to be able to teach anything, whether it be communication skills in an actual classroom, a language, empathy, and just using tools from theater and drama practices to be like the driving for, like to be the vehicle of getting that lesson out there. So I always thought, I was going to be a high school teacher. I was going to do my undergrad, go to teacher's college and be in a classroom. But I think I really, really fell in love with the community aspect. I feel like there's a lot of gaps in our country culturally. And we tend to, as much as we want to say Canada is the US is a melting pot and we're a mosaic. Is it, yeah. We still tend to be like, you are you and I am me. And so I just found like a really great love and passion for drama and theater being the way to kind of like build bridges where there are gaps. So that's a work I really love to do. I taught English in Italy. I taught communication workshops for science students at the university. I did a summer camp for kids that are in foster care, so learning how to like self-love and independence, teamwork, confidence, that kind of stuff. And right now I am a caregiver for seniors in Windsor.
Beautiful. That's amazing. And I definitely, in everything that you just said, you pulled on some of my heartstrings. So I feel like I know exactly the kind of thing that we'll both land on is education being the basis of so many beautiful things to create in our community. So
Yeah.
we're glad to hear that that's the kind of work that you've wrapped yourself up in.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I wanted to hear a little bit about the writing and the work that you've done with Eternal Remedy. Let's plug that.
Oh yeah. It's funny. I just sent some of my pieces to a friend, dear friend of mine. He writes scripts and everything. And I was like, he sends me his stuff to like read over, and we'll do read throughs together. And I'm like, God, like I really do miss writing. But then I look back at some of my pieces that are on Eternal Remedy, and I'm like, oh, I'm such an angsty teenager. That's why Mark called me teenager. And so so the pieces that I have were definitely like relevant to whatever I was going through at that time. They were mostly narrative, little bit on like the poetry side. And yeah, I met Steph. He was my soccer coach years ago, and I can't exactly remember how like we got into the conversation about like how he runs this website. I don't know if like maybe I told him that I write or he said something. And so it was a side of me I didn't really know that I had. I don't consider myself, I didn't used to consider myself as a creative person, because when you think of the word creativity, you think of like artist or singer, musician, someone that like you can like tangibly see, feel, and so when I found writing as like a coping mechanism, but also just to be able to share my story and relate to other people in different ways I didn't think I could, was a really great, something I cherish from my late teens, early 20s. I haven't written in quite some time, but I found new ways I was always like really hard on myself being like, oh, why did you stop writing? You're not creative. Maybe it was just like a phase that you're going through. But I'm starting to realize now that writing creatively doesn't necessarily have to look like it did when I wrote back then. And so right now it's more of like writing for the purpose of education. So it's like lesson plans, or like right now my client, she's like really progressive dementia, but she used to be a French teacher. So we do French lesson plans together every day. And so I'm like, that's my way of finding the creative writing aspect. So kind of like accepting that my writing style is changing, because I always kind of assume it's like poetry, narrative, essay, dialogue. And like, those are kind of like the 4 categories, but I'm like, oh wait, there's me as well. Like there's the, lesson plans. So
that's amazing. You've mentioned some of the creative work that you've done, and it seems to be that it's on such a broad spectrum, going from what we traditionally expect when we hear it, which is something like writing, to really putting creative work behind your day job and behind your your education and everything you've worked on there. So I guess really broadly, what does creative work mean to you, and how can you define it?
Creative work, I think in a very cliche sense, is like it's subjective to however you want it to be creative. In my 4th year undergrad, we do a directed studies, which is kind of like a free-for-all thesis. You pick whatever you want. And the goal is to kind of like have it integrated in drama. So some people, someone did like a workshop for Alzheimer's, refugees and stuff like that. And I found a love for communication workshops. And I remember reading this article about how we tend to separate creativity with the arts, and like problem and critical thinking or problem solving and critical thinking with like the STEM field, when really both sides use either as a driving tool. So I think creativity doesn't necessarily mean like artsy, but more of a versatile way to convey a message, or like not a lesson necessarily, but like a topic, I guess. So sorry, what was the second part of the question?
I mean exactly what you said. How do we define it? And I think you can that one.
Yeah, so I think it's being able to use whatever tools and skill sets that you have and convey what you're learning to somebody else.
So yeah, and like a couple of things that you mentioned that really struck me. You were talking about the internal conversations that you've had about when you faced not writing versus a time where you are, and those kind of conversations. And to me, that connects to also the work that you're doing, and that notion that critical thinking we attribute to STEM. So around those couple of points, do you feel like there's a certain pressure as an artist to embody your work in a specific way?
To what my work, sorry?
To embody your work.
I think so, yeah. I think a part of it comes from having a drama education background. Whenever I like speak to my clients' families, or even just other people, they're like, oh, what's your degree? Drama education. They're like, so why are you a caregiver? Like, what are you doing with old people? And there's always this constant pressure of like having to justify and validate my own career, because I consider this career. My own family is like, oh, like quit the part-time job, and I'm like, but I love this. Like, why do I only have to have one hat on for a 9-to-5 job? But I do have family members that are in law, so it's just the one full-time job, that's it. But for me, I actually, I was also working at the university. So I was working with the youth at the university that were trying to get to, like, they were high school students trying to get to university. And then at night, I hang out with old people. And I think it's, I do get kind of like exhausted, but there is that pressure of like, trust me, I know what I'm doing. And I really love it. And it's about bringing whatever skill set that you have, whether you have a degree or you don't, but it's whatever skills that you have, and bringing it to all of the workplaces, social environments. And I think we all kind of do that in a way of like proving our skill set. But I think with artists, there's just the stigma of, oh, you're a starving artist. Like you have to be, people tend to associate artistry with like fame, which equals success, but it doesn't have to be that way. Like you can have success within your own community.
Yeah. And what do you think that we can achieve if we take that kind of pressure off and look at that, the whole notion of creative work from the perspective that you've given, which I think us, especially at Turn Remedy, share?
Mm-hmm. That's a really great question. I think the best thing that comes out of it is like realizing that art isn't just a hobby. It can be a lifestyle. It can be a tool for teaching. It can be a tool for building empathy. There's a really great theater company in San Diego I got to interview for one of my projects, and they started this style of theater when Trump got elected, and it was an American woman, and a Canadian woman. And they're like, we need to do something because San Diego, the specific part that they're in, has a large amount of refugees, and a lot of high school students were facing a lot of discrimination. So they brought their project to this high school, worked with 13 high school students, and each of them were paired with a different style of artist. So there was a dancer, a spoken word poet, a performer, an artist, singer, musician, all sorts of different elements of art, and they were paired, and then they ended up doing this like episodic vignette of each of, like a deeper look into each of these students' lives, and they put on 3 different performances, all for free, open for donations. Whatever donations they made, they put back into the education program. And it was a way they kept it local in the community because they wanted locals that weren't necessarily just refugees. Like they didn't want just their family members. They're like, let's, exactly what I said, that, and that's actually where I got that, where it's like build bridges where there are gaps. And so I think art is that bridge, and people want to shut it out and be like, ooh, starving artist, but like, let's go buy Yeezy tickets. And you're like, you're defeating the purpose. But so yeah, I think when we limit artists as like, oh, you do your painting, foo-foo stuff, and we'll be over here in our business suits, like there is a lot of gap that you're missing.
Yeah, I think that's such a beautiful example of using art as an educational tool in an unconventional way that we don't tend to think about.
Mm-hmm.
So I know the story touched me just really, really too. I'm like emotional over it. But you mentioned something that had changed recently in their style because of some of the people who came in power south of the border. So, talking about what's relevant and what's up right now, how has 2020 changed your relationship with your work?
Ooh, specifically like with my like education work?
So I think in saying work, I'm thinking creative work, and I see you as a person who embodies creative work in your day-to-day, as well as a person who's got side hobbies and side jobs and side projects outside of the day-to-day. So for you, I would encapsulate all of it when we say creative work.
Wow. Okay. Well, I ended up getting, my contract was not renewed at the university because I would essentially run workshops for these high school students that were a part of a program called On Track to Success. So a lot of them come from like low socioeconomic, struggle academically, struggle at home and such. And so they got like after school tutoring, and from United Way was a part of it. And so my job was to run workshops, whether it was like how to apply for scholarships, or there was one where I brought them on campus for a murdered and missing Indigenous women ceremony that was held on campus. And so just different ways of, again, bridging those gaps. And so all of that is in person. I meet with the students, I help with tutoring, I run these workshops. And so when school moved online, all of my stuff had to move online. And I was like, how do I do that? It's different if it's like the tutoring is different online. You can kind of do that over Zoom. But I was just starting to like meet the students and get to know them personally and like know them by name. And then now we have to do it over a screen. So that was difficult because I could see that, these students who already felt like they were so helpless or hopeless in the educational system, that they were slipping through the cracks, they're finally clawing their way through it and, investing all this effort into doing it. And then suddenly everything shuts down and they're like, now what? And so I really don't, now that I'm not in the contract, I think about it all the time. I'm like, where are these kids going to end up going? Are they going to put their education on hold? And for those that are, you know, some of them don't have good relationships with their family, what does that mean for them? So that's been really hard to kind of navigate. With the caregiver job. That was like, you know, when I got this job in September, I did not think I'd be working in a pandemic. So it was really hard to kind of feel, it was just weird that people, you know, they start applauding all the healthcare workers, and but I still don't feel like adequate enough in my job because like I'm just a caregiver. And I hate even putting the word just in front of it, because I know people are like, oh, but I'm just a drama major, or I'm just a, you know, I'm just an artist, and it just always like minimizes whatever you put in after it. But it's like, I'm not a registered nurse. I'm not a PSW. I'm not qualified to do all these things. The best I can do is just be there emotionally for these people and physically when their families can't be. So, and in a sense, it's brought me a lot of comfort because I'm away from my family. My parents are in Niagara, siblings in Toronto. I haven't seen them since March. So you know, a family wrote me a thank you card. They're like, oh, you know, just for being there. And she was in the hospital, and they were like, thank you for going there. And I was like, thank you for like allowing me to be a part of your family. So that's another way I think of just like, I just love that her and I have so much in common, and I can't believe I was like, oh my God, like I wish we were travel buddies. Like she's so cool. And so I just think like education is like kind of like the through line of so many different aspects of my life. And now with, you know, the political climate of what's going on, I did a workshop in my third year about the history of the Underground Railroad in the Windsor, Essex, and Detroit area. And when I presented it, I think like 90% of the students in my class were Windsor, like from Windsor, and nobody knew a single piece of that information. And like so much of it is missing from the Windsor curriculum. And all it took was just like a simple Google, and because we got to pick the subject and the grade we hypothetically that we would be teaching in. So I said grade 12 history, because everyone did drama, English, like the easy way out. But I was like, let's try Canadian history. And it was just like mind blown that, like personally, I didn't even know that how extent like a huge part Canada played in the Underground Railroad. I thought it was just an American thing. I knew that we had slaves, didn't know to what extent, and all of this is in, like we were walking the streets that this took place in. So I ended up doing that, and now I'm going back and revising it, and I want to do like an actual virtual workshop to be able to like present this information. Because again, people tend to be like, it's an American thing. And it's like, but Windsor has a huge responsibility that we need to take because we border Detroit and because of our history with the Underground Railroad. So yeah, just adapting it online. I never thought like it was just really hard.
Yeah, it's, and like, you know, again, to bring it back to education, it's just incredible how we've been seeing a lot of education being the underpinning of so many problems. And I should say education or lack thereof being the, you know,
Yeah.
underpinning of why we're not familiar with these issues. Well, we look at the system and we look at the education and what we're being taught in school and why. And it's very clear to see gaps. And so I guess, so something I want to ask you, and again, same topic on education. If you were to incorporate creative work into, you know, something general like an education system in elementary school, where would you, or how would you infuse creativity into what kids are learning these days?
Ooh. I think, and I learned this from another one of the articles I read for my thesis, that I realized like how deeper it goes with like segregating art from everything else. Because like just our campuses alone, you have the biology building, the computer science building, the art building, and everywhere has like its own building. There's very little opportunity for people to intermingle within faculties, but not only the buildings, but also the professors. They don't get to, you know, connect with one another unless they actively make those choices in their own lives. And we have a professor who essentially started SMART, Science Meets Art. And so he found a way he had a third-year biology student create murals to put in the science building. And so each each, I think, discipline of science represented a different discipline of art. So I think it really starts with our teacher, like the people that are leading the classrooms. So I think if they had an opportunity to do a communications workshop or how to integrate art, so just as much as we separate creativity and critical thinking, we do the same thing with like communication and teaching styles with just like traditional, here's a PowerPoint, let me read it off the projector for you. So I think if that's where we start, like that would be a really great way of showing, because then, you know, they showed research of like how an engineering professor met with a music professor, and it's like, oh, how do we integrate both faculties together, and how do we teach something that finds a middle ground? Because like, who's to say that an engineer is going to be like, oh my God, like now I want to go into producing music or something and then become a sound engineer. So there's so many ways that like different faculties integrate together. Like in hospitals, we have clown doctors. That's a real, like I had a professor that was a clown doctor. So, you know, those are all like real tangible life skills that people, again, but because they associate it with fame and celebrity in Hollywood, they don't think it's a part of their life, but it really is. Like when you go to a museum, when you go to a concert, like those were engineers that were building the lights and putting them up. So I think where I would start is, I always thought that it's like, oh, just like be an artistic teacher. And it's like, no, you got to teach the teachers now. So.
Yeah, I think a lot of grows out of the intersectionality between different disciplines in school.
Yeah.
Amazing examples, you know, like you think about architecture. Well, there is an artist who actually put the plans together for that building. You know, you design of so many things. In every industry there's design. Well, there's an artist who design, so that intersectionality between whether it's engineering or science is key. And my nephew was telling me his STEM project or STEM class is now called STEAM. So I'm very curious to know, I'm thinking they're starting to incorporate art, and you think about how art really lends itself to technology, and technology being at the forefront of so much of these conversations these days.
Yeah.
You'd be remiss to not mention art when you're talking about technology, how it changes.
100%. Yeah. And they, like, art is always the elective. Science you have to take, and then, you know, in grade 10 or grade 11, it's like then you just pick which, you know, bio, chem, or physics, but you still have to take a science. Same thing with math. You have to take it all through. And it's like, why not art? Why not find a way to have it combined? It's just an elective. Someone's like, I don't care about it. It's a bird course.
Yeah. And then in that case, you get students hearing that same messaging, and the students hearing that messaging are then internalizing it and telling themselves that what they want is an elective or it's a bird course, and what they're passionate about, what they're extra skilled at is not something that the school is pushing, right? It develops these conversations in kids and in students that doesn't set people up for a career in something they're passionate in, really. I wanted to turn it over to Steph. I know these are some things that definitely sparked your interest and hit home. So Steph, thoughts there?
Yeah. So first of all, thank you both. You guys went straight into the heart of the issue super quickly, super early on, which is graceful of you both, and I appreciate it. There's a few things I wanted to reflect on or go deeper into because I'm so, again, grateful that you brought them forward. One was the false dichotomy of the frames of mind of something like STEM and art, and how those of us who have embodied both sides might be able to draw some awareness around the false dichotomy of that. And, you know, I try to show up and do that every day, but I haven't been explicit with it in any way. And I realized even in this conversation, there's a lot of work for me to do. But I wanted to hear from you both, and maybe even Kat and Mark, as well as, like, what do we do to make it clear that these parts of ourselves, our creative side, our artistic side, versus our more pragmatic and, I guess, logical and engineering side, are seen as intertwined and enmeshed instead of completely separate entities?
Everyone's like, okay, yeah, let me solve that for a second. I also wanted to comment, I think you mentioned the logic and so on, and being a person who's more on the side of STEM and science and technology, but still a lover of the arts, is when I'm producing something that's creative, I find that there is still logic and there is still technical aspects to it. So being a person who came from one lens before the other, actually I shouldn't say before because art did come first, but who's got one stronger lens than the other, I don't see there being really a separation. When I'm creating something, I like it to be technically very specifically, logically, laid out and the look of it. And that's why if I'm creating something visually, or if I'm writing something, it's I've applied that lens. So it's interesting to see how people put such a fine defined line between the two of them, whether it doesn't actually need to be, right?
That's such an important point for me, because I think the common connotation or association with artwork is it's like this loose, unstructured pastime that people engage in when the mood hits them, instead of this concerted effort of deliberate practice, like literally every other thing. And I think that actual connotation does so much harm to artwork. Like, the purpose of these sort of conversations, because people don't actually see it as tangible art, tangible work, in the same sense of like molding bricks and putting up walls. And so, I'm glad that you added that, and I don't know if that changes any of your answers. Just like what's the work that we need to do to make that sort of thing clear?
That's a good point, because it just kind of occurred to me, like, that's what I've been doing of, I only write when I'm in the mood or whatever. And you, Steph, have been like advocating for me since I started writing for Eternal Remedy. You were like, schedule 30 minutes every night and just write. Like, it doesn't have to be a refined, poetic piece, just like write about your day. And then, something will come up or something will not come up, and that's okay. You still wrote 30 minutes of your day. I haven't followed your rule, but I think now I get, like, the light bulb finally went off. I was like, oh, okay, it's supposed to like intentionally be unintentional. So that makes sense. So I think, it starts with us as well, like making it a habit and having that discipline. And again, maybe it's like my own internal stigma that I have with the art field as well, where it's like, it's all like, oh, fluffy, and it's always supposed to be, moody, or but it can just, like, I think Dave Chappelle's last piece that he just posted about what's going on with George Floyd, I thought that was so powerful. His stuff is always powerful, but the fact that he sat up there with his book and he was reading it, and he was just like, I know this isn't funny, but like, I'm mad and I'm angry and I need to say something. And I thought that was so, like, it was so raw and unrefined, but there was a point to it. And I think that's what we need to do with our art as well. And like you said, Nadia, to not have that like defined line of like, you can be like technical and nitpicky and get it right down to the fine detail as well. So I guess it's finding a balance between the two that I think I personally struggle with. But again, reflecting, because I do the same, like with my lesson plans, it's like sometimes I don't like, I know I add elements of like theater and drama into it, but sometimes I look back, I'm like, it's not that creative. It doesn't always have to be like a performance at the end or something that's so explicitly dramatic, that it can just be like, here's the lesson, here's the worksheet, ta-da. Discipline's hard.
Yeah. Kat, I think you're mute.
Oh, Kat, you're still muted.
Oh, no, I was just thinking about just kind of as an artist, letting go of the ideas of the kind of prescribed notions of artistic practice. And I think those are where these false luxuries of being able to treat the art as a whimsical act has come about. I think that the most kind of profound and kind of intricate works of art are done by people whose art was their primary practice. And I think the idea of being able to just slip into modes of inspiration is just a myth, and a huge myth at that. There's no way you can, maybe it's happened to some people, but you can't really just sit down and write a book just off the bat of good weather. just because it was a nice day and you felt really great inside, you know? So I think those things can definitely be interwoven within one another. I think especially having different modes of or different outlets to kind of express your artistic needs are important, and exercise is a really good one, that you can kind of express these more fluid ways of art in other areas to then be able to apply discipline to the places that actually matter, if that makes sense. So I think, yeah, again, like Alexis has said, just sitting down every day and getting something done is important. It's important to kind of get into the mode of knowing that this is something that needs to get done, regardless of your feelings and emotions towards it. And I think you approach it in a little bit in terms of technology, that all of these structures and what we consider to be limitations within art actually really serve to allow us to be a lot more free within it. When you have these structures that you have to apply, that you have to work within, you'll notice that your mind is able to work a lot more kind of with liberation and yeah, fluidity.
Heavily co-sign that point. Mark, I think you were saying something.
I'm wondering if why the dichotomy exists is because of the way we structure our economy as a society, or as societies in the Western world. Like, I think most of our societies are based on consumption and raw production, and we kind of leave out the exploratory side of like developing products and whatnot. So I'm wondering if why the dichotomy exists is because art is associated with exploring things, whereas in our day jobs, we're just there to produce something. We're not necessarily there to explore, you know, or our artistic or creative capabilities. So, like, you know, most of us would experience our world. If we have like a steady 9 to 5, normal 9 to 5, we would experience ourselves as being a part of like a cog in the production process, and not necessarily this agent of exploration. So maybe that's why we tend to think of art as something wholly different from, you know, something that is productive and streamlined.
Mark, I want to pose a chicken and egg question to you, which, so you've said you're wondering if the dichotomy comes from the economy, where we've divided and labeled the work as being in such category versus another category. Would that come first, or would the assumption that your category where you're talking about repeatable, scalable processes that we can pump out for economy has no art behind it? Wouldn't you think that that mentality would come first before we separate them? Because, I mean, and then that, you know, I mentioned before, like, if you think even if a repeatable, scalable process that we need to put in place for a technology to work had to have been designed in some artistic way. There has to be a level of artistry behind anything really that gets created. So I think would that mentality come first before we went out and separated them in the economy? I mean, separated.
Yeah, I think it would come first, but it would only be available to certain people. So I think it would be that mode of thinking, that modality of like doing things would be only available to the executive class, and I think it still is, because developing a business is a creative venture in my opinion, and but only certain people, you know, get to be at the top and, you know, making these decisions, making these creative decisions and whatnot. Whereas the mass of people are, you know, simply workers, and they're just simply there to be a part of the production process, or to aid the sort of supply chain along. And if you contrast it to like previous societies, what you'd find is that you'd have large bodies of artisan groups, wherein you'd have like shoemakers and I don't know, like metalsmiths or something like that. And what would happen there is that they would because their enterprises were so small, they had more control over their work, and they were able to be more creative, like, you know, in times past. But I feel as if that kind of like way of engaging with the world is rather it's rather available to the executive branch or the executive part of society these days.
So it's almost like the feeling of how far removed we are from the actual artistry as consumers is something that makes us feel as though that is a discipline or a field that is not on the artistic side versus another. Am I understanding correctly?
Yeah. I always thought it was funny when people complain how much like community theater tickets cost, and they're like, the show's not that great anyways. It's like, well, you know, local people but will go spend like hundreds of dollars for a concert or to see something specific on Broadway or whatever. And I'm like, you're feeding into that whole idea of art is only worth it if there's good money and like a famous face behind it.
Yeah, and we tend to talk about, especially lately, we've been talking about the influence of investing locally and investing in communities, and we talk about kind of things that we can be doing to the education system, but I think that just tacks onto that list of things that we can be doing to really further us, and I think as a generation and as a society to release the bounds that we have on how we're defining artistic work, and releasing the bounds that we have ourselves when we're trying to do non-artistic work or traditionally considered artistic work to do better, right? It's really pushing us further. Yeah, and so I guess I wanted to switch gears a little bit. We talked about how these companies, and maybe not really switch gears, but we talked about how these companies are infusing art into everything they do, whether we're realizing it or not. So Alexis, I wanted to talk about your process. When you're going through, you're talking about creating the lesson plans with your clients, and other work where you've got to infuse your creativity into it. What's kind of process that you go through when you do that?
I think the first thing the first bare question I ask myself, it's like, where can I integrate fun is the way I associate it. Like, I look at something, I'm like, oh, this is so boring. Like, I don't want to talk about compassion. Like, how do I actually like portray it? How do I get people to physically get up and do it and use their bodies? Because I feel like we're so tired of our phones every day. We're just like reading it and absorbing information, but like, how do you put it in your body? How do you put it in and vocalize it? So that's the first step I kind of approach. But also sometimes I find myself trying to look too deep into like I said earlier, like what's the obvious drama game I can play in this? When sometimes, again, like it could just be very like minimal. It's okay to do like reflections at the end, or it could be as simple as to help with memory. It's like my client and I, we went through the entire alphabet, and it's like you name 2 countries with each letter. And with some countries, she would remember a story of like, oh, when I went to this country, this happened, and or I met this person, or when I think of this country, I think of this color, and so it's like sometimes they feed their own creativity, and it just like it flows naturally, just like how group discussions work. So sometimes I forget the rawness and the importance of letting the conversation flow. Like, it doesn't have to be so scripted. So having that as a reminder as well, like it doesn't have to be so rigid, and let the process kind of like go along and be ready to be adaptable. I think that's also the biggest thing I'm trying to like make a habit of my process, is like be adaptable. They may get it, they may be better, or they may just kind of like not really think it's worthwhile, and then you move on to something else.
In the past couple of months that we've spent at home, have you found yourself with more opportunities to dive into your creative work?
Ooh. Yes. Have I always taken the opportunity? No. Yeah, I think there's just been a lot. It's hard to stay disciplined. It's hard to I feel like it's actually very easy to find the motivation for myself, because I remember how excited I was for about being in the education system, whether it was teaching or being a student. I think in any setting you constantly flip between being a teacher and being a student. So I just think with some of the stuff going on, and it's like I'm in the process of moving next week as well. So like I have that on the forefront, and things have gotten kind of hectic, and then trying to stay connected with my family. has posed some difficulties as well. So I don't think I've jumped on as many opportunities as I would have liked to, but on the brighter side of things, with moving, I got to go through all of my old schoolwork that I've just kept in this big box, and I went through it, and I was like, oh my god, like the passion started to like ignite a little bit more, and so I had an idea of what I wanted to do for this workshop about the Underground Railroad in Windsor, and then I was like, oh, and then I could talk about some of the books I read for my Indigenous literature classes and Indigenous feminism, and then how do we integrate it into what I learned in my exploration of masculinity course. So I'm starting to get the ideas. It's just about pushing myself to get started on them. I feel like I have so many like incomplete projects. So being patient with myself with tackling one at a time, because I want to do it really, really well and make it worthwhile. Let it like release it and then start the next one. I feel like I tend to kind of like dabble a little bit here, dabble a little bit there, and then I kind of get overwhelmed and I'm like, it's too much. There's a pandemic.
Yeah, I feel like you tell a story that a lot of people have been going through, and we kind of tend to hear, I can see a few people laughing even when you said it, like nodding along, like they know exactly what you're going through, exactly what you're feeling. I'll give you guys, I wanted to ask another question, but I'll give you guys a second, Steph and Kat, who are laughing along, to drop any thoughts that you had.
Yeah, so this is another excellent segment of the conversation, because you plugged embodiment so naturally and organically here, Dalia. And I just want to go back to a quote that I constantly relive and try to put into motion, so to speak. And the quote was from Yo-Yo Ma, who was listening to his music that he did a couple decades ago. And the interviewer asked him, what does he think of this piece? What does he think of hearing this? And he said, he sees a person with different priorities, and he's like, in every piece of work and every expression of his art, there's a suggestion of priorities. And what that really made me think is, even with all this fluid time in front of us, real embodiment is an expression of priorities. It's like literally living priorities. And I've just been thinking that as a calling for myself, like how, whatever I think about my own philosophies and ideas, at the end of the day, what I bring into my practice and lived experience is the ultimate expression of my priorities.
Yeah.
Yeah, beautifully said. Kat, was there anything that you had in mind, or just feeling the conversation?
Oh no, I was quite energized by the mention of kind of looking at old work and how that triggers just a really beautiful cycle of memory. And I'm really deeply interested in the idea of memory and how it just is really able to kind of rework itself. And this doubling effect of exactly what memory is, and then what it does when we allow it to kind of when we allow ourselves to be the conduit through which it can reproduce art within us. And I think that was like just a really beautiful part about what you had said, in that it continues to relive itself over and over again each time we visit it, especially within modes of photography. Just being able to revisit a photo on this kind of open mnemonic field, and it have new meaning every time. So that was really nice to hear that you'd experienced that kind of that rebirth from something that was considered old. Like there's something really happening there with that moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that you guys were both on the same page, because that same sentiment sparks thoughts in me as well, Alexis, when you're mentioning your old work. So I'm glad we're kind of all on the same page. So to stay on the topic of old work, I want to know, how did what you find influence you or impact you, and how you feel post finding it?
It's always nice to look back and see like, oh, okay, I see what like my aim was, or the through line of like specifically a lesson plan, but also having new ideas to kind of contribute to it. And you're like, okay, cool, I learned something from last year. So it's nice to kind of like validate for yourself. But I think it serves a really great reminder to know that I really do have kind of like a natural love for it. And I always have. My dad used to be a teacher, and he loved teaching us. He used to be a math teacher and a French teacher. And so, he was my math tutor, and he taught, I would try to practice French at home. So I feel like I've always just kind of had a love for that naturally. And, so whenever I feel discouraged, whenever I go home and see my family, just Thanksgiving, my brother-in-law was like, why don't you just like quit and move to Hollywood? Like, you should just like try doing that. And I was like, why? And he's like, well, you're in drama, right? And I was like, education. Like, I've never, like, not once have I ever mentioned anything. Like, I love theater productions, but I was like, not once. He's like, oh, so you like don't want to act? And I'm like, it's like you don't know anything about me. But so, and they're always like, oh, it's the side job. And, because like just a few months ago, I was working 4 jobs. I was bartending at 2 different places, working at the university, and being a caregiver. And so they're like, you should just quit all of those and move to Toronto and do one job. Like, I don't like doing that. I love being able to put on different hats and be different styles of educators throughout my day. It keeps me on my toes. I feel like I learn something new at the end of my day, whether it's a random fact about a country or, an actual like tangible, I'm like, oh, I can like really explore that. So I think, whenever I feel discouraged about, am I doing the right thing? Like, should I be doing something different? Like my sister had said something about, she's like, I just see you're not reaching your full potential. And I was like, but what about what I'm doing right now is not my full potential? Like, why do you see something different than my own life that I know I'm living? So I think it's always important to go back to your work and realize, to see the growth, but also to kind of validate it for yourself and be like, no, I did make the right decision. I am doing what I should be doing, and I'm making decisions for myself, by myself. So I think, again, it's putting my words into action, essentially. It's like, I'm telling myself all this, I'm giving myself a little pat on the back, and it's like, okay, but actually do something. Like, kick yourself in the butt and be like, so I got a bunch of books and resources, some from Detroit, some from Dresden, where Uncle Tom's Cabin is, which is Josiah Hudson, who was a freed slave from the US. When he came to Canada, he built that cabin himself with 13 other freed slaves, and they essentially were like, we are going to teach our own people. So they were their own educators, they were their own preachers and homekeepers, and they did it for themselves. And I was just really inspired by that story of how they were like, what, no one's going to do this for us. We have to do it ourselves. And with the little that they had when they came to Canada and made their way over to Dresden. And so I feel like we can do the same thing with our artistry. Do something with it,
Amazing. Alexis, I'm loving this thread of how we can expand our view of creative work and our definition of a creative to include an educator that uses all these different art mediums to really send home an amazing message. So I also just wanted to do a little time check. So we're at just about the hour mark right now. We normally use this time to let everyone know that we know it's been an hour, so that if anybody feels like this is just about time and the sun is shining for them on a Saturday afternoon, that we don't cast any judgment if you feel like going. But I also wanted to pause here and give some of the Turn Around Remedy team some opportunities to share some thoughts, drop some gems, and ask some questions.
I was wondering if, of looking at your past work, or of the feelings that come out of looking at your past work, or the joys or the pleasures, of looking at your past work. I wonder if those feelings have something to do with how we experience time. And I feel, really, at least for me anyways, like I don't necessarily experience myself as this thing that is stuck and concrete in time, but I experience myself as something that is flowing through time. Mm-hmm. So I never really get a chance to look at myself as how I am in this moment. And I think that for me, going back to my past work and reading it and like taking a stock to like, have it reach out to me is one of the few and only moments that I get to look at myself as a concrete thing in time. So it shows me who I was back when I did the work. So I'm wondering if that's the feel, that's the mode of being behind, revisiting your past work and being, like this was me at such and such a time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's definitely that feeling of excitement, because like the only time we really think about the construct of time is when we're looking back at it, and it's like, whoa, I didn't realize that was a year ago, or even last week. Oh my god, it's already Saturday. I spent the whole day thinking it was Friday, and I was like, oh my god, it's Saturday. So I think it's like our own personal time capsule, that like Steph said, it shows what our priorities was, but it also shows like where our excitement, but also like where our intention was. So some of my projects where I was like, oh, I could tell this was just to like please my professor, get them off my back and be like, here's what you wanted. And some of my other work, I could tell that like I really cared about trying to convey a hopeful message or something. And there's also some where I look back, I'm like, dang, I didn't think I was even like capable. Like I was kind of like ahead of my time. A quick short story. I had a placement for a grade 4-5 split class, and we read the Lorax. And so I wanted to do something about like environmental love, essentially. And because I'm such like an eco-friendly nerd. And so I ended up writing this fake letter that was supposedly from Trudeau. And I had our teacher, who just so happened to be a graduate from my program, I was like, oh, did you get a chance to read the letter? And he goes, oh, no, I didn't. So he read this letter, and essentially it was like, so the way I had like his fake signature, which I'm not sure if I was even like allowed to do, but and so this letter was like, oh, great things happening in Windsor. We're going to open up all these car factories. We're going to tear down Jackson Park, and we're going to, recess, unfortunately, is going to be canceled because of how many cars are going to be on the road. But, good things are happening because jobs and money and this and that. And I read this letter thinking that they were just going to be like, it was either going to completely fly over their head, or maybe they'd be like, oh man, recess. I made 2 kids cry in the class. They were like, they can't do that to the trees. Like they were so upset, and they were like, and it was their idea to hold a protest. And these are like grade 4-5 kids. And they're like, and because there was a point where I was like, oh, you're only going to get heat or air conditioning for 1 hour a day. And they're like, we are not going to sweat in our classrooms. Like we deserve to breathe air and not wear gas masks. And they're like, and one kid wrote they're like, how do you spell Prime Minister Justin Trudeau? So I wrote on the board. One kid went behind my back and scratched out and put Prime Monster Justin Trudeau. And so it was like really exciting to see how it was like, that was my second year of university. And I was like, I did not think that that's how it was going to go at all. And, there are times where I'm running workshops at this point in my life, and I'm like, oh, that totally fell flat on its face. So seeing that the progress has its up and downs. So part of it is like, feeling joy when you see that, but also being like, oh, it's okay, because I fell and succeeded multiple times throughout the journey. And it just kind of serves as a reminder to be like, failure is not a step away from success. It's a step into success, because it's part of it. You can't have one without the other.
Such an amazing story, Alex. And I just want to show a moment of gratitude to Mark for introducing time, because it brought back the point I was actually trying to close on yesterday, or in our last session, just about earning and developing the objectivity to look at yourself through benevolence, to stand just enough distance away from your lived experience so that you can see yourself with grace and forgiveness and honor. And I was just thinking about the beauty of reflecting on old work. For me anyhow, is my definition of art has to do with the experience of wonder. So through someone else's lens, I get the sense of wonder about the world and of things and of our emotions and such. But when I look back at my own stuff, I get to see my own sense of wonder in play at that time. And so I get to look at my sense of wonder in a sort of benevolence, where I'm like, look at how this kid saw the world, and what sparked their interest, and what raised their attention and energy. And I get to see that and get to experience that from that sort of objectivity, where I can really engage with in a way I couldn't while I was living it.
Yeah, that also ties into the point of looking back on the work that you've done, and I guess like just like the growth and the priorities. When you mentioned the priorities earlier, I think it ties really well into that. Sometimes I'll look back on something that I've written and think that the priority overshadowed the work, and you know, and especially in write, like, you know, a lot of my writing comes from anger. So if I'm writing, I'm looking at that priority, and, you know, yeah, it was beautifully worded. Sure, I picked some nice ways of saying things, but it was just really that the priority of that kid and that lesson that that kid was learning was one through anger, of anger. And and yeah, I can definitely remove myself and to tie that into Mark's point as well, and to look and see that was a priority at a period of time. And then again, to tie it into that journey, Alexis, it's like that period of time, I'm removed from it. It was a step in my journey. That was a priority. It kind of, it puts it all, I think all of you guys' points tie in really nicely together to kind of that whole notion of looking back on work. Smart kids, you guys. I'm gonna open the floor and give an opportunity to any of our extended family, audience, and guests, if there's anybody who wanted to chime in, to give some thoughts, to show some love, to ask some questions. Please feel free to use the space.
Hi everyone, I'm Ashley. I loved how Mark was talking about how he flows through time. And something like, even as the discussion was going on and hearing about kind of like the shame that comes with not actively doing something or actively working on something, but knowing how important and how beautiful that time is. Like, Alexis, all the ideas that you're getting now, even though like you're going through a pandemic, you're moving, you're doing all of this stuff, but actually those are ideas that are flowing right now, that are coming in. It's actually such a beautiful time, because it's and important. That stillness is so important in the work that we do, because eventually that's always going to be something that informs that concrete piece afterwards. So kind of, even though we're not necessarily, we're not seeing like we're doing something in the moment, it's actually, we are that reflective practice, that the way that we see the world around us, the way that the world is informing the way that we see things as well, is so important in terms of that flowing that that Mark was saying, until you reach those pillar points.
And I think, Ashley, you brought up something that we normally do mention, but we didn't in this point, which was rest and stillness, and the importance that rest and stillness give to a lot of the work. I know we sort of blew past it because we had some, but I'm glad that you brought that up, because I think it's something worth mentioning every time, really, is the break, the rest, the stillness, and taking a step back from the busy just to be human, right?
I really enjoy that point. And what immediately came to mind was that creative work is not doing as well as doing, but further to that, creative work can be undoing. And so in that process of taking the moment to be still, there's this sort of healing from the fixations and things that are pulling us in directions and pressures and oppressions that we exist in daily, but without the moment of stillness to allow us the space to start unraveling and undoing those, we just keep pressing on. I think that comes at the expense of good creative practice.
I was thinking about the point on memory again. And I just love the idea that it can produce a level of distortion. And I love the idea of distortion and disruption, because time in and of itself as a thing, as a construct, is distortion. Like, it's not a kind of tangible and linear experience that we all engage in at the same time or in the same way. So it's really nice, like, when you can kind of revisit those moments, the way that it distorts your perceptions of time, as well as your ideas and your kind of warped notions of yourself as well. And regardless of where that distortion lands you, on the, hopefully on the richer end of what Steph was talking about before with regards to honor and grace and forgiveness and equanimity. It can also land you on the end of fear and withdrawing. And I think both of those experiences are equally as important. Being able to like look back on a piece of work and get rid of it if it's not productive, if it's not in the place to sit within where you sit now in time. If that makes sense.
You have to make sure that the things that you're holding on to also serve you.
Yeah. That's a good point about memory and distortion, because I have specific training in clients with dementia and Alzheimer's. And the reason why I like kind of got into this industry unexpectedly was because like last summer, my dad was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and I didn't really like this job came up, and I was like, I think this would be really cool to like explore in finding a new way, because I'm so used to like teaching younger kids, and you're like, how do you teach someone who's older than you? And you know, who already comes with so much more life experience than a 10-year-old. But I remember I'd shared a story my client had told me about his mom like almost made it on the Titanic but missed it because she got day drunk with her boyfriend. And so I like shared that story, and my brother-in-law was like, yeah, but it's probably not real. Like, how can you take his word? He has dementia. And I'm like, but who cares? Like when he's telling you the story and you're like gripped to the edge of your seat, like, did she make it on the Titanic? Like, who knows? Did she make it and she survived or whatever? And I was like, who cares? Like, all of our memories are distorted. Nothing is I was convinced for the longest time. I just had an argument with my dad about a specific memory, and he was like, no, like, this is it. And I was like, Dad, you're wrong. You have Alzheimer's. And I ended up being wrong. And I'm like, all of our, regardless of whatever cognitive deterioration we have, we all have some sort of memory distortion. But like, I think what sticks the most in some of the readings that I find is smell and texture. So, you know, like that's why we have certain memories associated with certain smells. Like, you know, when I smell grass, I'm like, I think of soccer, because that's when soccer season's starting. And so I feel like that's also like a different way to, depending on where we are in our life. And again, this is just like specific to my field of work, but like bringing those back to specific memories, whether or not they're real. So, and I don't know, I just think it's so unique to the art fields that we're so lucky we get to explore. I think of how boring my sister and brother's jobs are in their law firms and their suit and ties, and you know, Toronto, they get on the TTC and they go to work and they come home and they just complain about the traffic. And I'm like, I had a really great day. My client said she was in Japan. So like, that's exciting. And that's okay. And so, yeah, I need to get better at like appreciating the stillness. But like I said, I went from 75 hours a week to now just 30. And I feel like I definitely have a better appreciation for bringing creativity back into my work every day as a lifestyle, not just as a hobby or a paid gig. So
beautiful. Absolutely.
To your point about memory, Alexis, I'm wondering if it's indicative of the fact that well, not the fact, but like the idea that human beings are created to be artistic. And that's just to say that your memory, or what you remember, as far as I understand, is you remember the things that are important to your own personal life story.
yeah.
You know, it's like, so like grass for you means soccer, because soccer probably is important to you.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering if that's what that says to me overall, is that human beings are set up for stories more than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's where our need for art comes from. You know, so.
Yeah, because I think it's a way to hold on to those stories. I think we have an innate fear of losing those. Like when you suddenly remember something that you hadn't thought about in years, and how much joy that one memory brought you, and you're like, oh, I wish I could like hold on to that forever. And so it's like the word association game I like kind of doing with myself, where certain foods or certain places and whatever I associate with either a person or a feeling or moment, experience. And yeah, I think humans naturally are just a collection of stories. And I think everybody is deserving of those short stories to be shared. And I think art in any shape or form is the tool to do it.
And like furthermore, it's interesting to me that like what you remember can be wrong.
Yeah.
You know, like
it's their truth regardless.
Yeah. like how's a memory incorrect?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and why is it incorrect?
Yeah.
You know, and it might be incorrect because your story needs it to be incorrect.
That's true. Maybe it serves a different purpose for you. Because I also think about it. My brother has schizophrenia, and when he was going through psychosis and like his hallucinations and delusions, and I remember I was going to therapy to kind of like specifically about like how do I cope with this. My therapist said, if he says the sky is yellow, you say yes, the sky is yellow. She's like, because that's what he sees, and that's okay. She's like, we don't have to prove everybody wrong all the time. He's just, you know, it's already exhausting to do that on a day-to-day basis. You know, 1 + 1 = 2. And it's like, that's wrong because X, Y, Z. And, you know, it's okay to have someone live their truth, especially when it has nothing to do with you. You know, he's not going around telling people I'm doing all sorts of things. It's just, he's saying, in my life, this is what I believe to be true. And that's okay.
And here's a crazy idea. Like, who's to say that he's wrong?
It's true.
Yeah. Notion of perspective.
Yeah.
Fact versus perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that, Mark, I think it's an interesting take to look at the concept of losing a memory and filling it in with a piece that you feel like has to be there. It's like, I might tell you the story of what we did yesterday, and I know the story. And because of, you know, the scientific reasons why I've forgotten, I don't have this fact, but my body's telling me I want to put this fact in, you know?
Yeah.
Very interesting notion.
I have one roommate that's so adamant on like logical thinking. That is the only like scientific fact. That's the only way around life. And every time I try to like share a personal anecdote, he goes, no, but that's not, he's like, that's just like a personal experience. And I'm like, but my personal experience is still the truth. Like, that's what I'm trying to like convey. And he's no, Ben Shapiro says this and whatever. But that's a different story.
Cool philosopher.
Yeah.
And it definitely speaks to our state of being right now, and you know, to some of the conversations we've been having about the Black experience and what's lived and known versus what's told to people and communicated, and how we're supposed to express to somebody that this lived known fact that we have is a true fact, when someone can look on the other side and say, well, that's your stance and your opinion, right?
Mm-hmm.
I find it so interesting that we never, well, explicitly anyhow, we never planned for the Embodied series to be this timely. But I certainly know within my journey that it's emerged itself as the highest truth. Like, regardless of all the other things, all the other knowledge and information I've acquired over this time and in my life, really, I realize it all comes back to, how do I actually show up? How do things actually show up in my lived experience? Mm-hmm. You know, in the last few conversations we've had, that has been the undercurrent that has really sat and taken hold of my thought space. Just like, yeah, you can tell me anything about this past time, about the pandemic. I can learn a lot about it, but all that I truly hold as the highest truth in reflection of it is exactly what I lived. Mm-hmm. And I really appreciate you all for, in your own way, teasing out that truth within me and within each other and within these conversations, because I think that sort of learning makes this whole thing so much more bearable. It makes my experience of it much less dissonant, so to speak. So, yeah.
I feel like sorry, Mark. Was Mark in the case? Oh, no, I feel like I say this every Eternal Remedy chat. So maybe I'll just keep doing that. It's just like a thing now. But how important the idea of like our kind of our trans-global, transatlantic relationships are, and just to kind of tag on to what Stefan was saying about how influential everybody's individual experiences, particularly throughout the crisis, has informed our own individual experiences of what they have become, and in a really really beautiful way, like. And that's obviously in retrospect, because in real time it may not feel that way, but just how our overlapping of experiences have really kind of changed the map of what the whole thing might have looked like otherwise. And it's been particularly lovely. Yeah, especially in this conversation as well, with you, Alexis, just speaking about the different age groups that you've worked with as well and spent time with. Like, I think often it's hard for us to imagine what life, especially if we're looking at time, what life exists, where life exists, or where we sit within these two spaces as 30-year-olds or as middle-aged people, you know? We can't, it's so hard to think about what it would be to be a child again, or to be an elderly person then.
Yep.
You know, so yeah, it's been really, really lovely. So just kind of expressing gratitude to you as well.
Oh, thank you.
Absolutely. And reflecting back on these conversations, and I mentioned how excited it was for me to have an educator who's, you know, we're talking about creative from the lens of an educator. We've touched on so many corners of the creative space and the creative world with the kind of people, the kind of professions, the kind of passions that we brought into this space. So definitely doubling up on the gratitude and just saying, Alexis, I'm super grateful for what you've brought into our conversation group and into our group of, you know, amazing people we've been speaking to.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks to Steph for bringing me into this years ago.
we thank Steph really often, so maybe I'll skip my thanks to him. But
he could stay humble.
He's probably going to turn this off and just thank himself after.
He can ask me anything, to do anything, but to stay humble is simply too much.
So good.
That's Mark's job. That's Mark's job. To stay humble. That's where Mark's.
Actually, to take away the attention from Steph to his sister Edleen, she taught me something back when I was like 18 or 19, and she had said that we tend to look at priorities as a ladder, that like you have one above the other and, you know, you climb your way to your top priority. She goes, when really it's a round table. And so you have your eyes on all of them at all times, but you just choose when and how you want to give your priority to all of them. So it's okay that like it's all hands on deck all the time, but you focus, but they're each in your peripherals. So I think that art and creativity serves as that reminder for myself that I really am like doing it day to day, whether it's like finding a new way. You know, now I'm learning multiple languages at once so I can still talk to my students in Italy and learn Arabic to speak with my dad and learn Greek to speak with my mom. And yeah, just like weave it into together, just like how we should do with the education system. Like no more biology, like have your labs and everything, but like bring art sculptures into the biology building, bring like science research into the art building and engineering. Like there's so many ways that we're missing out on. I think we're missing out on really great experiences. So thank you for really being that the bridge to all these interfaculty opportunities.
Yeah, of course. It's absolutely our pleasure to hold this space. Alexis, I want to give you an opportunity as we wrap up to plug any work that you may want to plug, or if not, then don't. Step out what you need to. This is your time and space.
I guess probably just follow me on Instagram because I'm working on the Mark's always laughing at me. No, but because I am working on that, it's going to be a video series, like maybe about 3 or 4, and then hopefully the last one will be a live, like a process drama for the final piece about the Underground Railroad. And I'm going to film it on locations in specific spots in Windsor and hopefully make it out to Dresden if I can leave the city. But yeah, so I think that's pretty much like the thing that's on the forefront right now that I should be releasing hopefully in the next couple of weeks after I move and settle in. So yeah, that's about it.
Absolutely beautiful stuff. Just put your Instagram in the Zoom chat for anybody who hop on. Hear that work is upcoming, and I really look forward to it. So I want to thank everybody for the time that we spent today, the time that we shared today in the space that we created, all of the thoughts. I'll give a second if anybody wanted to close off, send your gratitude or thanks, thumbs up, anything.
I want to say thanks to Alexis for being here. In the vein of being humble, I would like to say that like she was my right partner like many years ago, and I don't know. I think I've had like a great influence on her.
Thanks, Mark.
I wake up and hear your voice every day, if it helps.
As you should.
Wow.
I just like to say thank you for being here, and also that you're welcome.
So good. And in true tone of way, we had to just sprinkle that on there. Beautiful.
So just in terms of plugging, as always, stay posted on our socials. We have more of these coming. Can't believe somehow we've kept this momentum going. And the most imminent one is tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern time. We'll be back on the Zoom doing our thing, and we'll sadly be entering the last week of the series. So, yeah, it's been such a wonderful ride, and these have only been increasingly enriching every time, and so we're looking to end off next week strong, and yeah, keep posted.
And big ups to Nadia.
Big ups to Nadia.
Every time it's just fire. So big ups to you.
Big ups to Nadia.
I'm nothing without my team.
That sounds like a Drake lyric.
That's my creative work. Surprise. Give him his
That's true. Drake has a ghostwriter.
like in the Staying Humble, Nadia used to be my writing partner.
Yeah, check me out on the writing team. Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you guys very much. Enjoy the Saturday. It looks like it's beautiful outside, and I hope in all of the cities that everyone's joining in, it is just as beautiful as it is in the 6. So shout out to you all on this beautiful Saturday, and enjoy the rest of your weekend, guys.
Cheers, everybody. Bye.